Let us all, for a minute, grasp the idea of mother and child relationship. Regardless of parent or not, at some point we felt that relationship in our lives. Now, how on earth can a child be pulled away from their parent? There are exceptions where cases where parents are abusive, um, are unfortunately drug addicts, and the government steps in with special programs to take over the kids temporarily until parents are back to normal to take the kids back. However, when parents smuggle into United States with their children, it is obviously most of the time for a reason for a better life of their children, for safety of their children. Trump administration announced a zero tolerance policy where they do not make exceptions. Those who cross the border with children will be pulled away from parents and will be persecuted. But those who actually cross the border, enter ports, and present themselves will stay with their children until their court hearings. Refugee parents are forced to leave their countries for one reason or another, to save their children, for their better future, and for those children can potentially become important people for our government here. I have been following Trump administration's acts on the border and how they've been handling the whole illegal crossings. I cannot, let's just say, imagine being pulled away from my little girl. First, instead of putting those children in jail, they should be taken to ports of entry like the rest and have them be presented and wait for their court hearing. Now, according to an article called Trump Administration, a policy will impose potential criminal penalties on border crossers who previously faced crossers who will previously face criminal civil deportation proceedings, and while in the process force the separation of families crossing the border for months longer. The new policy could potentially flood the immigration courts, already suffering severe backlogs, and create new detention space shortages for federal agencies that even now have been forced to release many undocumented immigrants until their cases can be heard. The new policy strikes squarely parents who have traveled with their children, some apparently with the expectations that they will face shorter periods of detention while their cases were heard. According to the article, border apprehension totaled 50,924 in April 2018 compared with 15,766 the same month last year. But the 2018 figure was roughly the same as that of April 2016. Now that I have discussed a little bit of the rules of how Trump administration has decided to deal with the border crossings, I will now talk about in specifics how children are held in this while being separated from their parents. Children being held in deplorable conditions with bare minimum amenities causes long-term effect on their childhood. According to article separating children from their parents, the children were housed in deplorable conditions. Senator of Oregon, reported seeing children in cages with only bare minimum blankets to sleep on the floor, no mattress, no beds. Some of these former Walmart warehouses were actually separated with chains, the ceilings were covered with chains, and the cages were actually separated with gender and age. Now, how much of a long-term effect all this behavior can cause for these children? They have already been going through trauma of their country, of their origin, to migrate for a better life. And now they're stuck at somewhere where they're only being discriminated in one way or another. On top of that, they're being pulled away from their parents. Now, a little bit of a personal story. Back in 1996, where my father was actually doing pretty much the same thing, left the country due to our country of origin being in extreme critical crisis within the government. He left the country in hope of taking us with him as soon as possible. However, that process actually took him for 5 years until the court allowed him to bring us to the States legally. Now, within these 5 years, we heard of stories of people smuggling into the States illegally, and some of them were actually caught and sent back. My father was fearing of all these actions, which is why he chose the route of doing it the right way. Now, it took it long. It actually took him some time, but it was actually legal for all of us. Now, we were with our mother, and while being away from our father for 5 years, it didn't seem as horrifying as if you imagine we were to be pulled away from our father at the border, being held in cage for I don't know how long. Now, hearing of all these stories of all those who were illegally migrating to the States, once they were caught, they were sent back. Nobody was actually, no child was actually held back from their mother. They were all either sent back or they were all presented at the port waiting to get legal documents. Now, Trump administration is coming on with prosecution laws to cut down illegal border crossing. However, pulling away children from their parents doesn't solve the issue. Today, I have talked about how Trump administration is handling illegal migration and how children are kept separate from their parents in cages with a blanket only to sleep or with chains hanging on top of them. Trying to lower illegal migration shouldn't pull children away from their parents, keep them in such conditions that can actually cause them long-term trauma. Now, Mrs. Trump said that she hates to see children in such conditions, and she hopes that both sides of the aisle can come up with peaceful immigration reform. Now, the next time you hear a story of a child being pulled away from their parents at the border, please, whether they're kept in a former Walmart store or they're in cages, separated in ages and gender, with barely any amenities or food, please tie back to Japanese American camps of World War II and feel how inhumane the president's decision is on pulling children away from their parents.